Welcome to the Humanergy Leadership Podcast. My name is David Wheatley. We're here to talk leadership in small, bite-sized and practical chunks. Enjoy. So this episode, we're rejoined by the good doctors, Judy Brown and Rick Eigenbrod, who are my wise sages around some key topics. And this episode's topic is on leader transitions. And it's the idea of what we need to be thinking about as a leader is about to transition out of an organization, and just the pre-work, the during, and the post-work, so that when the new leader comes in, everything is set up for sustained success. So Judy, you wanted to kick this one off. So what we're going to talk about?
Well, let me tell you what prompted this in my mind. I think part of it, what prompted it, thinking of my own experiences where a transition out of what I would call a key primary CEO-like role went well, and thinking about why. What about the way I approached it made that possible? What about the way others welcomed me? What about where the organization was? But the most critical thing present that got me thinking about it is a conversation with people who are new CEOs. So this is the perspective from people who have settled into a CEO role in an organization within the last couple of months, or at least within the last couple of years, and being present to their reflections on how that has gone for them. And as they thought about what was at play, what I heard, it wasn't what they said, but what I heard was this dynamic of what went on with the person who had the position before, and how did that and the current reality of them being the CEO now, how was that dynamic influencing the sustainability of their leadership moving forward? And, there are all kinds of stories, those of us who do coaching and are witness to organizational dynamics, that we have seen play out of a leader who was a founder. There are a lot of founder stories in this, and whose whole life was the organization. So when the time they agreed it's time to turn over the leadership of the organization to a new person, and a perfectly wonderful person is selected, the founder finds him or herself unaccountably unable to get out of the way in a variety of ways. Yeah. And the impact of that on the new young talent, using young in the sense of fresh as opposed to chronologically, the fresh talent, is that wasn't on their scope about how things were going to be. What was on their scope was to think, what should I know going in? What do I need to be able to do? How do I form good relationships with the board and the leadership team? And instead, they find themselves entangled in more history and the presence of that history than they expected, and that allows them to move forward in a graceful kind of way, and without really good ideas what to do about that. That's what it amounts to. So that, on the other hand, let me go back. On the other hand, there are stories of people whose predecessor spent a long time grooming them, and then just comfortably kicked them out of the nest of the job they were in before and into the new position, kind of like the parent bird just doing wonderfully helpful things. So there are both kinds of stories. So those are on my mind, and I'm wondering what advice, counsel we might share with each other and with the people who are with us about these kinds of leader transitions. So wade in, guys. That's my
Well, so you're talking about a whole bunch of dynamics, but when a CEO or an executive director moves on, how to best transition that. And I know there was some data from maybe 3 or 4 years old now, but I think the average tenure of a executive director taking over from a founder of a nonprofit is 18 months.
Whoa.
And so it means that if you take over from that founder, you've always got that struggle. And there's nothing worse than taking over, whether it be a nonprofit or for profit, and finding out the old CEO is on your board.
Right.
Which is what you're talking about there, isn't it? That eye over the shoulder. That's a matter of, I don't feel like I can do anything. The best thing the old CEO can do for the new CEO is get out of the way and leave them to it, which
Right.
is kind of what you're saying about the bird out of the nest.
Right, which reminds me that one of the best things the old CEO can do, that is one of us who is looking ahead to, I'm going to step out in 2 or 3 or 5 years, is get a life.
Yeah.
And that is go to work in advance, finding out who you are in ways other than in your CEO role. And I want to add, and what relationships do you have or can you foster other than the ones that are completely wrapped up in this organization that has been your life for so long? So that's like, for heaven's sake, think ahead, think about launch of yourself into a new stage of your life.
And I think this applies, you're coming from a world of a lot of elder care facilities, and I was talking about nonprofits there, but a big part of my world is family business. And when you look at the same dynamics in a family business transition, there's some fascinating things that work and some fascinating that make it horrendous. So
right. When Rick and I were having a talk about this, he laid out a process that I just frankly had never heard of, but it seemed to me to have real logic for making that transition thoughtful and intentional, and more likely to be successful. Rick, remember it was the deal about tell the new boss to get out of the room and get somebody to take notes on flip chart. Will you walk us through some of those questions? Because it struck me that in a way, it creates a kind of intentional, and I'm going to say intense, because it puts it all in a short period of time for people to do the mental work they need to do. So sorry to put you on the spot, but would you get on the spot and explain it?
get on that spot, Rick.
On the spot. Well, what I've enjoyed is, since this topic came up, all of a sudden I've found my mind going to things I haven't thought about in a long time. And actually some work I'm doing in response to a request to talk about and talk with about the issues and the dynamics of people who are about to sell their business or just have. And so I want to mention that how important that reminds me this transition is for the organization and for the two people who are replacing each other. I will mention Jeffrey Sonnenfeld's work, The Hero's Farewell. Basically, he talks about the importance of the leave-taking patterns of the CEOs and the importance for the organization. Jeffrey Sonnenfeld, The Hero's Farewell. I found myself spontaneously thinking about this issue of the leaving, one part of the leaving. There's two issues here. There's the issue of checking in and checking out. Somebody's checking in and somebody's checking out. What are the issues, dynamics, challenges, requirements for each of those parties to handle this ending and beginning well? Again, if we think about bridges, beginnings start with good endings. So for one person, it's how do I end well? And for another person, it's how do I begin well? And so this notion about we have two tasks at hand, not just for the people, but for the organization. And how do we handle checking in and how do we handle checking out? And that may be a framework that's useful for folks. Judy, do you still want me to just, I can give you that a quick answer to your question, but I thought that overview might be useful.
Um, yes, I think the overview is useful. Some of the detail on the questions that a facilitator might ask the team,
Yeah,
the leadership team, having sent the new CEO out of the room and presuming the old one is not hanging out in the room. All right.
yeah,
The old one is gone. The new one has been sent away for coffee, and a facilitator walks the team through some questions. I think those might be helpful to people. They were really helpful to me.
Oh,
So-
okay,
Just
happy to
framing
do
those
it.
up as well, Rick. One of the things that you were talking about, that transition in and out, because we're talking about CEOs or executive directors, but I think it applies, you can generalize it
Totally.
to everybody. And I've been doing some work with somebody at a large aerospace company recently. He probably listens to this, so I better get this right. He just transitioned into a new role, and one of the keys was write down everything you're doing in the old role and hand that piece of paper to your successor and stop doing it.
Oh my God.
And then get your boss, who you're taking over from, to write down everything they do, to hand that to you, and then tell them to stop doing it. That's my quick and dirty version of what you were just talking about.
Yeah,
That's
it's
brilliant.
yeah. There's this whole letting go. I mean, I think one of the patterns or the challenges we're talking about, again, whether you're, particularly if you're checking out, is letting go, right? There's this whole thing about letting go. And what do you need to check in? One of the things I would say to folks who are checking in is be clear about what your requirements are to saying yes to the new job. There's some work that's been done on high performance patterns. It says you got to know your high performance patterns, but I think particularly inside the organization, when you move up or whatever, there is this sense about, oh boy, I got this new job, more money, more titles, more whatever, everything, but it may not have what's required for you to be successful in that position. And I've talked to CEO after CEO where you hear the story is the owner says, come on in, I want you to run my company. And my eyes roll, it's like, so what are your one of the things for checking in is what are your requirements for saying yes to the position? You may want to say no to the position because what you need to be successful isn't there, and you're doing nobody any favors by saying yes. To answer you, Judy, there are any number of versions of what I'm going to say, which is what can you do to help this transition take place? And there are any number of methodologies, which I think we call new manager assimilation in general terms. But here's the process. You take the new manager comes before the group and says, somebody's here to help us make this, to help us have the conversations that we would have unsystematically around the water cooler, to exchange all the important information, but it takes place over long periods of time. It takes place in bits and pieces. So our job today, or our task today, is to have those conversations and to have them where we're all listening into the conversation at the same time. You guys go to work, I'll be back. The new leader leaves, and some version of these questions gets asked. One, what do we know about David?
So Rick, and I want to add, because I remember when you said this, these get asked and all the answers get written up on newsprint that is visible in front of everybody.
Really important, Judy, really important.
So just
it all
can I
goes up.
clarify that the questions that people want to ask get written up on the newsprint?
No, the answers to the
answers?
questions
Okay.
that they are going to be asked get written up. So if you say, so the first question, for example, and there are many versions of this methodology. So you say goodbye to the new leader. See you after lunch. The first question is, what do we know about David? And it all goes up.
The new leader.
We capture what they think they know about David. The next question is, what don't we know that we'd like to know and it'd be important to know? That goes up. The next question is, what concerns do we have about his or her coming? That goes up. What do they need to know about us? That goes up. What are the critical issues faced by this organization? That goes up. So that's just an example. So now you have all of these questions that people have been carrying around with them and trying to get answers to in the most unsystematic way. And in the process of doing that, they also have conversations with themselves and come to know each other's, the mind of the group. They come to know the mind of their own mind, so to speak. So you do that, you have lunch, the boss comes back, and you start walking through it. Here's what they think they know about you. Is this true? Is it not true? Are there things you think you'd like to say to them that you want them to know? That all goes up. You go to the next thing. They want to know about this. Tell them. And oh, by the way, you didn't ask me about my management style. I'd like you to know that. It's really important. Here's some things you said I need to know about you. Would you explain this to me? Why is that important, et cetera, et cetera? Then you go to, what concerns do you have about my coming? Boy, is that an interesting conversation.
So what's the tummy? Explain that.
Sorry?
What do you mean when you say, what questions do you have about my tummy?
Coming, I'm sorry.
Coming.
Coming.
Good Lord, am I glad I asked that question.
Well,
I thought you were trying to get at the emotions of the person.
Judy, you just stumbled into a really interesting question. You know,
Yeah.
what concerns you, what do you think's in his tummy or her tummy? That would be a great, again, there's so many versions of it, but you can see what the importance of that is. And how it accelerates the exchange of really important information. So you go through all the questions at the end, then you say, given all of this, what are the critical things that we need to get done with each other in these first 3 months, 6 months, whatever it is? So you have this agreed upon action, a set of action steps, and no executive team feels like they've done anything unless they have action steps, God forbid. You know, my sense is that action steps are really good in terms of getting work done, but mostly what action steps do is reduce anxiety. So anyway, Judy, there you have it.
So it's interesting because, and the reason I asked the clarifying question, I've done a similar new leader assimilation exercise, a slight variation where the new leader leaves the room having introduced them to me, the facilitator. And then I gather all the questions and I put all the questions up on my mind map. And then when the new leader comes back in half an hour later, I ask the leader the questions. And the advantage is because I usually when I've done it, I've known the new leader. I know that there's not a single question on there that I can't ask reasonably, and he will answer as directly as he can. And yet the group doesn't know that. And so they will slowly start to give me the questions. And then they're kind of like, are you really going to ask him this? And it's like, yeah, I have no problem at all asking him that question. And I can pretty much tell you what the answer is going to be. And that just cuts the kind of the sniffing period down quite dramatically.
Right.
Yeah, it's interesting. I love that phrase, the sniffing period. It's gossip across the back fence, you know, which has all the accuracy of gossip across the back fence. David, you've done, yeah, it's not an unusual thing. I mean, these are institutionalized in big companies, these processes. I do the same thing you do, essentially. One of the questions one could ask, I always ask those questions. And then when the leader comes back, I walk him or her through that. Mm-hmm. But I love what you add to it, which is, what are the questions you have that are important for us to ask the new leader? So there's many variants of this, but what it does, again, is it accelerates and the exchange of critical information. It lets the group know its own mind, where it's in agreement, where it's in disagreement. And it has a very nice and easy way for the boss to start having these important conversations. And as my one of my truisms is our lives in our organization, the consequence of our conversations, the ones we're having, and most importantly, the ones we are not.
Right. And this
And that's
pulled
the,
out.
I was going to say the question that quite often I end up asking is, what's the question you would like to ask, but you wouldn't if he was in the room? And so that I can ask that question. And like I say, because I've known the person, because I never have an issue with asking those questions. And it's always kind of interesting as people kind of tentatively share that. Well, I'd like to know if he's going to lay everybody off. Okay, well, that's a great question. Let's put it up there. What? Yeah, let's put it up there and ask him, and you'll get an answer. Judy?
Can you imagine, David, the difference in the organization and its impact from you facilitating that conversation, the conversation not had? If we don't have that conversation, imagine the consequence, right?
Yeah.
Their own anxiety, they walk through the organization and spew it all over the place. People come to them and say, we're going to have layoffs. They say, I don't know. The anxiety, I mean, it's just, I think what you're really talking about is how much difference it makes if we can have these conversations, including the one we probably wouldn't have had you not been there to help them have it, Dave.
Yeah.
Amen.
Yeah, we're dramatically speeding up what we call in What Great Teams Do Great, the caring, honest, and direct conversations.
Right.
And what happens if you don't do that is you end up with 2 of those 3 things, which is not useful.
Well, and you're not only speeding it up, but you're modeling it as an initial condition in the relationships. And that sets things in play down the line that are really important. It's a way of operating, and you're making it clear that's the way of operating. The other thing that struck me about this is, I'm not good on quotes of famous poets, but I think it's John O'Donohue who said that questions are light the way to something or other. Rick,
Yeah.
Yeah. Quote.
Yeah. John O'Donohue says, questions hold the lanterns that light the way.
Yeah. Fabulous.
And in this little session you had with them, it's exactly what happened.
But it's also doing this thing, which is freeing the incoming leader from a sense that he or she needs first of all, needs to have all the answers, needs to understand everything that they need to understand coming in fresh. And secondly, that they are the only ones who will ask the questions. So what you have is you have created a norm of, as David, as you said, open inquiry about things that people tend to hold inside and think can't possibly be asked. But I want to go back to something that Rick said, because I've been sitting with this and thinking about it. And that's the idea that don't take the job unless it absolutely meets your requirements. No matter how excited you are because you've been asked to take the job, it's just exactly what you always wanted to do. It was on your life plan, the whole thing. And so you just grab it. And so instead of being the kind of mature leader that Rick is suggesting, where I have sussed all this out and made sure that the last CEO does not have the parking spot right in front of the main lobby and isn't going to be on the board and so forth and so on, I instead come in as an excited and naive new leader. And so the question I'm asking myself is now, so that person is going to find themselves in the middle of the muddle. What guidance can we give them, and particularly the team around them, who are also excited that this person has come? You know, it's been a rough 20 years with the founder, and finally we've got somebody new. Isn't this exciting? How do they keep from colluding in a train crash out after 18 months, David, as you said? How do we help them? How do we help the new naive leader who did not ask the right questions now take some steps that increase the likelihood of success? That's what's puzzling me. So, guys, if you've got any ideas, what can they do?
Judy, for me, I think if you begin with this notion my first priority as an executive, it certainly is my first priority in my consulting role, is no bad work. No work is better than bad work. And I think people who are tapped for these promotions fall into this kind of automatic a treadmill that takes them into that, and they wake up one morning and they're sitting in the chair. The fact that they would think about, I'm going to avoid taking a position that I can't succeed in and will not serve the organization because the conditions for my success and their success are not being met by the people bringing me in. Our dear friend Jill Janoff talks a lot about contracting. Before I take a job, I'm going to contract around what they want and what my requirements are, meaning what I want. And all the data I need is in that conversation. And how I show up as a leader in that conversation, I've already begun to move in, which is, no, I'm not here for yes or 3 bags full. Just tell me what you want to do. Give me the list of things that the old person did and I'll do those. That's not okay with me. And so there's a sense about I've established a relationship as the leader in the organization. I talk about, you got to move in. You know, so here's the question. What are all the things you need to do to move in? And if you're not sure, if you're not clear about why you're there, you'll never move in. And so I think one of the things that the new person moving in to increase success is to have these conversations with themselves. Secondly, one of the things that I want the organization to be clear about, and David, I think this gets to one of the interests you have, which is, what if you don't have all the answers? I want to be really clear with this organization, and I don't have all the answers. If you require me to have all the answers, you are doing a disservice to me and you in this organization. I need space to screw up. I need the space to go through the process that is going to lead to my and their development, and being given a list or a recipe will truncate my development and that of the organization. There's a long answer, Judy.
That certainly was. David weighed in.
But let me build on that, because we use a process, because if the person's getting there and they recognize they don't have all the answers, they recognize that the founder has been there for 20 years, that they're in that difficult spot, they've probably got a little bit of imposter syndrome, like we've talked about previously, because I've just started this new role and I don't really know what I'm doing. So that vulnerability to say that, as you're saying, that I don't know all the answers, is important. And we use a process we call feed, need, seed, weed, which you don't need to remember what order that's in, but it's what we do to plants. If we want the garden to grow, we feed, we know where we need to be, we seed it, we weed it. But it's really 4 questions. And my encouragement would be, gather the key stakeholders and ask them these 4 questions. What's currently working and why? And let's spend a long time on that, because that honors the past, but also digs into what's causing those things to work. So it's not working because of this person, it's working because of what else? And let's dig into those causes so we understand the structure that's there.
David, can I interrupt for a second?
Sure.
That what strikes me about that is that eliminates the mindset that those things are working because the prior leader was here. That your idea of digging into what are the conditions that have allowed that to work is brilliant. And sorry for the interruption. Now go ahead, but that is really important.
And people tend to skip by that in everything, in feedback, in all sorts. They skip by the what's working and why question all too quickly. And that could be 70% of our conversation. And then everybody expects the next question to be, okay, flip that, but I don't. The next question is, where do we need to be as we move forward? So I'm not looking back. I'm looking from the present forward, and I'm getting the group's engagement of where do we need to be? What's the future look like? What's the think places? And this allows somebody to say, we need to move in a different direction without blaming the founder for a resistance, because we're now talking about from today moving forward. And so that second question is, where do we need to be? The third question is, the seed question is, what tools, practices, resources do we need in place to make that happen? Which again is building on what's currently working and looking forward. So you maintain the past and you get the excitement about the future. And then the last question, which I quite often don't need to ask because I've answered it in the first three, is there anything we need to stop doing to ensure our sustainable success?
Right.
But quite often that's been answered in a positive way in the first three, as people say, well, we need to do this. Well, in saying we need to do this, it's saying we need to stop doing this other thing, but it's all about this positive forward trajectory, so that that new leader in that space gets the engagement of the team and the excitement of the team while honoring the previous 20 years of the founder.
You know, David, this reminds me of something that really struck me this week. I got an incoming email, and it was about a new leader coming into the presidency of one of our area institutions, one of the premier HBCU colleges. And I know the outgoing president, and he is just terrific. But this is the new person coming in. And what he said, and I'll see if I can remember this exactly, but he said, one of my goals is to lift the research reputation of this institution even higher. He didn't stop with lift the research. It was the even higher at the end that was a complete honoring of the person who came before and where they were. It was so subtle. It was brilliant. So subtle.
Yeah. And that's that great. Those four questions in my mind do that same thing. And whether we're talking about a new team, giving an individual feedback, or the new leader coming in, I routinely go back to those four questions because they're all about something we can do. We can move forward without dismissing the past.
This conversation all of a sudden strikes me and reminds me of the brilliance of John O'Donohue's statement. Questions hold the lanterns that light the way. Look at how much we're talking about how if we ask the right questions, it will light the way. And people, when they get uncomfortable, when they get insecure, when they get anxious, they will look to the leader in a way that takes us back to when we were kids. You know, it tends to throw us into dependency relationships, and we look to some authority figure to have all the answers. Well, I will hold what I was going to say next. And we're saying there's a discipline that that we can have if we can operate at a higher level of development that says we're not going to let ourselves and each other and myself fall into this dependency relationship where the expectation with respect to our relationship to the leader is that they would have all the answers as a way of reducing our anxiety. No, grown-ups operate in a level of uncertainty and anxiety, and the ability to do that it is a part of the capacity in the organization we want to have.
Yeah, it reminds me of the Team of Rivals, the great Lincoln biography, and one of the things that I got from that is this picture of him in a room with a bunch of people around the table who didn't like each other, but he saw as being the experts in their field, and he would ask them a question, and they would then argue and debate and shout at each other for an hour while he sat in the corner smoking his pipe, and then all of a sudden he'd say, "So this is what we're going to do," and everybody would look around and say, "Yeah, that makes sense." And because he'd asked the right question, and then he was studying and watching and seeing, and he could bring clarity from the melee that was caused by these smart people.
David, here's a question I think only maybe someone like you or an outsider can ask of the departing leader. I'm trying to think if somebody inside could. I think it's harder. But I think one of the questions, remember, we have checking in, checking out, and what are the tasks that each individual in the institution has to take on? It's involved with the issue of checking in and checking out. But one of the questions that I think needs to be asked of the departing leader is, what constitutes ending well?
Wow.
Take the concept of ending well. That's one of your last contributions. It is a lasting, impactful contribution.
Right.
You're not just walking, so let's talk about what ending well means for you, means for your successor, and means for the organization. And let's go to lunch and have that conversation. Maybe drinks.
A very long lunch. For that to happen, the organization needs to not hurdle itself into the transition, but to begin that process of conversation about it, particularly with the leader, well in advance. And I'm really struck by the level of self-knowledge it's going to take on the part of the departing leader to, first of all, realize the loss they're going to feel when they're no longer in that important place in that organization that's so important to them, and to be able to step back and maybe even step back in their lives and say, which threads of endeavor and things I cared about did I let go in order to give my life to this organization? And how might I want to begin to pick them up again? And I think I would add, if one is willing to be self-revelatory enough to tell others, and how can others help me? Others might help you in a variety of ways. They might say, look, you have to take a 2-week vacation this year. You just have to take it. I know it's all kinds of things going on in our organization. You have to take a 2-week vacation because it's important to your development, to your transition eventually, and to us as an organization. Then I go back to the thing that we said sometime else in one of these conversations, and that is, by holding on to the work, we truncate the development of our entire team.
Yeah.
So they don't get to develop. So somehow helping the leader who will eventually leave realize that letting go is the greatest, letting go of the work is one of the most important things they can do for a transition that may look to them like it's 2 or 3 or 5 years ahead.
It's interesting for the people who are moving on as well. I've drawn the graph before of, you say I'm gonna retire in 12 months, and then what people normally do is they keep doing what they're doing for 12 months and minus a day, and then dump everything on that last day, and that leave it well is like a step down. So now map out that next 12 months, and what are you going to hand over at what point? And when I've had that conversation with leaders, they've often said, but that means that the last 3 months I'll have nothing to do. And it's like, that's perfectly okay. Go do your lap of honor. Go and meet everybody in the organization. Go and sit in the cafeteria and be that ambassador. But you'll have then handed it over in the best way for the next person to come in and be able to then pick that back up again, because you've actually let go of the work, as you've put it.
As Judy, as you know, and David, as you know, part of my work these days is working with this dynamic of what happens when you get what you want. This notion about, how success, in this case for the leader leaving, how success comes with gain and loss. And the one thing that I think the organization, the responsible leaver, has to understand is, you will be faced with a blank sheet of paper. And Hemingway says it takes more courage to face a blank sheet of paper than it does the bull in the ring. Do not allow yourself or to avoid that blank sheet of paper by having the organization provide you with what goes on the blank sheet of paper by hanging on. Hanging on is deadly.
Right. That hanging on is deadly for you and for the organization. And yet, if you get to know yourself early in that transition, you may be able to find yourself on a path that completely surprises and energizes you and gets you out of the way of whoever is coming in. So, David, do you want to wade in and see if you can make some of your wonderful summary comments about this ramble in the brambles?
Well, I was going to say that I appreciate that. To the leader who's moving on, what I heard was make sure you're ending well, which often means letting go of things on a regular basis, getting out of the way and leaving the best space for the person coming in and the team to pick things up and move ahead. For the new leader coming in, there's be vulnerable. You don't have to have all the answers. And there's some questions that allow you to both honor the history and move to the next level if you engage the team in questions like what's working and why, where do we need to be, what do we need to do to get there, and is there anything we need to stop doing to ensure sustainable success? Did we nail it?
I think so. Well done, as usual.
Once again, you've been listening for another 45 minutes or so. Thank you, Judy Brown, out in Maryland, and Rick Eigenbrod out in California for your wisdom again. And we look forward to catching you next time. That was the Humanergy Leadership Podcast. My name's David Wheatley. For further information about Humanergy, go to humanergy.com or check out our latest book, What Great Teams Do Great, from all good bookstores. Have a good one. Stay healthy.